It was raining when Daniel Parker, a single father of a 7-year-old boy named Ethan, drove home from work. The streets were slick and gray, reflecting the city's cold indifference, but something made him slow down near an old rundown bus stop. That's when he saw her, a little girl, no older than 10, sitting alone on the wet bench, her small frame shivering under a thin, tattered coat. Her eyes were closed and her head tilted slightly as if she were asleep. Daniel hesitated. Something about her seemed off. He could feel it in his chest, a sudden jolt of unease. He pulled over. "Hey, are you okay?" he called, stepping out of his car, water soaking the hem of his jacket. The girl didn't respond. He moved closer, crouching to her level, and that's when he noticed the cane lying on the ground beside her. Her fingers twitched toward it instinctively, then froze. Daniel's heart sank. She was blind and alone. "Can I help you?" he asked gently, but still no answer. Her lips parted and a whisper came out, almost swallowed by the rain. "I'm waiting," she said, her voice trembling. Waiting for what, Daniel wondered, his mind racing. The streets were empty, the buses long gone, and the night was darkening quickly. He scanned the area, but there was no guardian in sight, no parent, no one. His instincts screamed at him, this girl was abandoned. Daniel quickly lifted her into his arms despite the protests from the storm. She was surprisingly light, almost fragile. "We'll get you somewhere safe," he assured her, his own voice unsteady. As he placed her in the passenger seat, she whispered again, "They said I'd be safe, but they lied." Daniel froze. Who had said that? Who could have abandoned a child in such a cruel way? Back at his apartment, Daniel set her on the couch, wrapping her in a thick blanket. Ethan, curious and wide-eyed, peeked from behind the kitchen door. "Who is she, Dad?" he asked. Daniel swallowed hard. "I don't know, buddy, but we're going to take care of her tonight." The girl's name, she finally revealed after long, hesitant moments, was Lila. Her story was fragmented at first, broken sentences and long pauses. She had been living on the streets for months after her parents had abandoned her. She didn't say why. Every time Daniel asked, she flinched, her small hands pressing against her ears as though trying to block out some invisible horror. The truth of her past was wrapped in darkness, and even the warmth of the apartment couldn't chase it away. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. Leela sat quietly in the corner, humming softly to herself, a sound that was both eerie and comforting. He kept thinking about the bus stop, the rain, the way her fingers had hovered over her cane, like she was used to being alone. Questions swirled. Why would anyone leave a child like that? Why hadn't someone noticed her sooner? And then, a chilling thought hit him. What if the people who abandoned her were still looking for her? He shook his head, trying to banish it, but sleep was impossible. The next morning, Daniel tried calling the authorities, but Lila panicked at the mention of police. She refused to say where she had come from, only muttering that they would come for her if anyone found out. Daniel realized he had stumbled into something much darker than a lost child. Her fear wasn't ordinary. It was visceral, almost tangible. He knew he couldn't leave, her to face whatever nightmares her past had carved into her life. Days passed. Daniel learned to communicate with Lila, teaching her to navigate his apartment, to trust him and even to laugh a little, though shadows always lingered behind her eyes. Ethan, too, formed an instant bond, insisting on sitting next to her during meals, reading stories and holding her hand during bedtime. But even as warmth and a sense of family began to creep into Lila's life, the tension never fully left. Every knock at the door, every stranger in the hallway made her flinch. One night, while Daniel was preparing dinner, a soft knock came at the door. Lila froze. Daniel approached cautiously, opening the door to see an older man soaked from the rain. His eyes were sharp, calculating. "I'm looking for a little girl," he said. Daniel stepped protectively in front of Lila. "She's with me." "Go away," the man smirked as though amused by the defiance. "I think you should listen. You have no idea what you've taken in," he warned, and left, disappearing into the shadows. Daniel's stomach turned. Who was that, and what did he mean by what he had taken in? Over the following weeks, Daniel uncovered fragments of a terrifying truth. Lila's parents weren't just neglectful, they were involved in a criminal network, trafficking children. Lila had been used as a bargaining chip, kept blindfolded and isolated to make her more controllable. The bus stop wasn't a random abandonment, it was an exchange point. She had somehow escaped that fate, but she was still being hunted. Daniel's apartment, once a safe haven, became a fortress. Locks were reinforced, alarms installed, and Daniel never let Lila out of sight. One rainy evening, as thunder shook the city, a shadow fell across the window. Lila froze, a scream caught in her throat. Daniel grabbed her, leading her to a hidden closet. And within moments, men broke in. But Daniel was ready. He fought them off, calling the authorities with shaking hands. When the police finally arrived, the men fled, leaving Daniel and Lila trembling but alive. The aftermath was surreal. Lila's true story came out slowly, painstakingly. Her parents had sold her to traffickers, claiming she was disabled to make her less noticeable. Months on the streets had sharpened her survival instincts, made her wary of every adult, every stranger. Daniel couldn't believe the cruelty she had endured. And yet here she was, alive, clinging to him and Ethan like they were the only constants in a world that had betrayed her. Months turned into a year. Lila began to thrive. She learned to read Braille, play piano, and laugh without fear. The bond between the three of them deepened into something unbreakable. Daniel never stopped being vigilant. But for the first time since finding her, he felt a cautious optimism. One evening, as they sat by the window watching the sunset, Lila leaned against Daniel and whispered, "Thank you for not leaving me." Daniel's eyes blurred. "You don't need to thank me, Lila. You're family now, always." For Lila, the journey from the bus stop to safety had been harrowing, but in that moment, surrounded by love and warmth, she realized she had finally found the home she had been waiting for. And for Daniel and Ethan, the girl abandoned in the rain had become the heart of their little world, a shocking reminder of the darkness in humanity, but also of the extraordinary power of compassion and courage. Chapter 3. It had been almost 2 years since Daniel found Lila at the bus stop, yet the shadows of her past never completely disappeared. Even with the warmth of their home and Ethan's constant laughter, Lila sometimes froze at sudden noises, or flinched at the sight of strangers. Daniel knew the world could still be cruel, but he had resolved never to let it touch her again. That determination was about to be tested. One evening, as Daniel was returning from work, he noticed a dark sedan parked across the street. A man inside was watching the house intently. Daniel's heart pounded. Something about the man's gaze triggered a memory in Lila, a fragment of a face she had once seen in the dim corridors of her past. The realization struck like lightning. Her past wasn't done with her. She had been found. He quickly ushered Lila and Ethan inside, locking every door and window. The familiar tension in the air thickening. Lila clung to Daniel, whispering, "They're here, aren't they?" He swallowed hard, trying to remain calm. "We'll handle this," he said, though his own fear was clawing at him. The man outside had been patient for 2 years, watching, waiting for a moment of weakness. And now the moment had arrived. Daniel called the police, but deep down, he knew they would only arrive after the confrontation. He needed a plan. For the first time since Lila arrived in his life, he considered leaving the apartment entirely, moving somewhere no one could find them. But Lila refused. "This is home. I can't run forever," she said, her voice steadier than he had expected. Her courage was remarkable for a girl who had lived through nightmares most adults could never imagine. Night fell and the shadowy figure returned, this time approaching the front door. Daniel positioned himself between Lila and Ethan, his fists clenched, heart hammering in his chest. The man's knock was deliberate, calm, almost taunting. "Lila," he called, using her name like a weapon. "You can't hide forever. Come with me and it will all be over quickly." Lila stepped forward, her voice clear despite the fear. "You sold me once. You won't take me again, never." The man laughed softly, a sound that made Daniel's blood run cold. "Do you think a child can defy the world? You belong to us and you always will." In that moment, something inside Lila snapped. She remembered every detail of the years spent surviving alone. The hunger, the fear, the cold nights, the betrayal, and she refused to go back. With a force that surprised even Daniel, she reached out and grabbed the heavy umbrella leaning against the door, swinging it like a weapon. The man recoiled, startled by her audacity. Daniel took advantage of the moment, pulling Lila and Ethan inside, barricading the door with every heavy piece of furniture they could move. The man pounded on the door relentlessly, his shouts mixing with Lila's own defiance. "I am not yours," she screamed, and Daniel felt a surge of pride. This little girl, once so broken, was fighting back with everything she had. Police sirens finally wailed in the distance, and the man disappeared into the night, leaving behind only a lingering sense of threat. But this confrontation changed everything. Daniel knew they couldn't stay in the same place forever. They needed protection, witnesses, a way to end the nightmare for good. Lila, surprisingly calm despite the encounter, said quietly, "I don't want to run anymore. I just want to live, really live." Daniel understood. They would find a lawyer, file for guardianship, and work with authorities to dismantle the network that had caused Lila so much pain. But more than that, he understood that the girl who had once been abandoned in the rain had grown into someone who would never allow fear to define her. Months later, after legal battles and careful planning, Lila was finally safe in a court-recognized home with Daniel and Ethan. She attended school, learned self-defense, and began advocating for children who had been abused and abandoned. Daniel watched her, amazed at her resilience, realizing that the storm of her past had forged a courage most adults could never comprehend. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Lila turned to Daniel and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me that day at the bus stop. If you hadn't stopped—" Her voice trailed off. Daniel squeezed her hand. "I saw you, Lila. I knew you deserved better, and I wasn't going to let the world hurt you again. You're safe now." For the first time in her life, Lila believed it, and Daniel, who had only intended to help a lost child for one rainy night, realized he had found a family stronger than anything life had ever thrown at them. The past had been dark, terrifying, and nearly unstoppable, but together they had survived it, proving that love, courage, and unwavering determination could overcome even the most horrifying truths. And as the rain began to fall softly on the rooftops, Daniel,